Good morning and a warm welcome to our session on thriving amid change. My name is Jana Werner. I'm here with my awesome colleague Philip Brunn. We're both executives and residents at AWS. We've led large-scale change ourselves in our previous lives and now help leaders like you and their executive teams to drive change in your organizations and create more adaptive organizations. Now, what we found in our own experience and working with so many of our customers, there's a number of challenges and mistakes we see again and again. And man, we have made quite a few of those as well, haven't we? So what we'd like to do today is share some of those common mistakes with you in the hope you can avoid them and make your new interesting mistakes instead. But before we get started, let me ask you a question. Who here has completed a transformation program, came in on time and on budget, and is now done transforming? Anyone? I like the usual.
It must be dark because I can't see any hands.
You can't see any hands, me neither. So what we find often is that how we think we deliver transformation, we plan it, we roll it out, is quite different to how change and indeed innovation really permeates through organizations, how it sticks and scales. So what's the difference and why is there a difference?
Well, much of this is our models we think about organizations with, based on 19th century thinking, Frederick Taylor and the such like. If you think about your organizations today, we base them on these models that were all about predictability, repeatability, measuring the individual, getting the individual to do more of the same thing faster, what we call productivity. It was about control and maintaining order, measuring that individual, breaking down complicated tasks into individual tasks that were repeatedly done by the same individual. And essentially, many of our organizations today still remain like these factories of the 19th century. Organizations are founded on a culture of permission to innovate, permission to take a decision. But today, work is less transactional. It's based on trust with the customer, with your employees, a broader set of stakeholders even. You can't command, after all, exceptional outcomes from your organization. So in working with organizations today and talking to over 70 executives across a wide range of organizations and geographies, what we've identified is over 300 dysfunctions that prevent organizations from becoming a better version of themselves. Now, we broke these down into about what we call antipatterns, 40 antipatterns. These are conditioned, formulaic responses we have when challenges happen with good intentions and surface level appeal, but they actually make things worse. Right, the good news is we're not going to go through all 40 or 300.
That's so disappointing.
Well, we can do if time permits. But what we do want to do is give you an illustration of a few of these today, and hopefully they'll trigger some thinking about what you can do in your own organization. Let me start with a couple of examples. This one's it's before lunch, probably not a good idea, but has anyone heard the story of squirrels at Schiphol Airport? No? So, in the late 90s, 400 squirrels were being transported from China to Greece. I don't know why. But they went via Schiphol Airport. And at the time, these squirrels needed passports or paperwork. They didn't have them. So, a well-meaning employee picked up a handbook on how to deal with illegal squirrels. And there was no rules in there. But there were rules about livestock. Said employee took 400 squirrels live, dropped them into a chicken shredder. Now, good news is 40 of them survived. But the real moral of the story here was the CEO of this company was interviewed. And he said, yeah, it didn't look very good, but we were just following the process. And what we find in many organizations today is process has replaced thinking. Or some of you may recognize this, hopefully from a past life. These corporate mission statements that you're going to be a platform-based, machine learning, AI-enabled organization that leverages your corporate synergies to deliver outstanding customer outcomes. Meaningless. And if you read this, what it's really intended to do is appeal to Wall Street and say, hey, we're going to make some changes and we're going to digitally transform and hope there's going to be a positive reaction to that. Or another one. Dependency health, something that could take half a day for an employee to do, now requires them to talk to 20 other teams and people, and now takes 3 months to achieve something very simple. All very simple, very common anti-patterns we see. And unfortunately, the way we try and address these dysfunctions of organizations is we follow traditional transformation methodologies, which actually mirror the structures we seek to overhaul in organizations. Rigid, linear, top-down commands around how to transform. We bring in external help. They look at benchmarks, spans of control, depth of organization, percentage of money spent on training. It becomes a race to the bottom. You may spend 5% on training. I think I can get it down to 4%. So out of this pops an organizational chart. You may be familiar with this. This magic happens. We end up with an organization chart, and then we proceed on a 3 or 5 year project to get to that end state. We believe that a linear plan can get us to a better place, to become more agile, to become more sophisticated with technology. And it actually feels a little bit like wiring your organization with dynamite and pressing the plunger. It's soul destroying. We go through this massive plunge in productivity, and eventually we may get back to somewhere where we were before, maybe a little bit better, and we're exhausted. And because we're exhausted, we stop transforming and we start to slip backwards. The focus again turns internally on our own organization rather than what's happening in the world around us. And there's a root cause to this failure. And the root cause is often we treat these transformations as if we're dealing with a complicated organization. An organization which can be broken into smaller parts, each part fixed, and then recombined with a linear plan to bring a better version of our organizations together. In fact, you may have seen on the way into reInvent, on the Sphere, they were advertising The Wizard of Oz, which is ironic. I don't think we paid for that, but it sort of fits with the theme of the presentation, which is we compare these old organizations to the Tin Man in Wizard of Oz. Rusty, slow moving, no agility, lacking heart and soul. We try and treat organizations as machines that churn out predictable results, unemotional and logical, and doesn't really engage our employees. So what is the answer?
In reality, organizations and their transformation, what the systems thinkers among you will realize as calling them complex, governed by emergence. You can't predict mechanically the impact of a change you make. Something you change over here will have ripple effects or require a bunch of dependencies to be changed along with it. Just to give you an example, we looked at what it would take to implement 2 pizza teams, so our Amazonian equivalent of product teams, in an organization that isn't set up for it. It's more than 160 changes. It's about who you hire, how you retrain your managers to lead, and the technology you provide to these teams and the dependencies you have to remove. So a lot of changes that are very hard to do top down and in one go. So we'd like to invite the leaders we work with to shed the Tin Man metal rigid suit and think about something more fluid as inspiration. An octopus. Did you know that an octopus has neuroclusters in all of its 8 arms? So it's got little brains, distributed intelligence that work together with the central brain. This creature also has an absurdly sophisticated ability to adapt. It can shapeshift, it can change the color, the texture of its skin, and it can even edit its own RNA to adapt to different conditions on a molecular level. It's also super curious, wants to learn and wants to solve puzzles. So if we take that a bit as an imagination, we think about change not done to people top down, but with them, tapping into the distributed intelligence of our organization, creating the condition for emergent solutions, letting those who are close to the work to understand really how work is done, close to the customers and to the technology they can adapt to solve problems differently, be part of the solution and own the solutions, and help and allow these people to solve problems continuously. We rarely do transformations at AWS or Amazon. We combine and bring together change and run in one continuous adaptive organization. And of course, this is about always combining learning with impact. A Tin Man organization often mistakes activity for progress. In octopus-like organizations, we know that progress is activity that generates both value and learning. We embed experiments as part of our daily work to improve and adapt our organization. And lastly, Octopus leaders look at achieving more with less. It's about a subtractive mindset, taking things away. Where can we remove a dependency, a process, friction in our organization? And that is what we call at Amazon our day one culture. So we've grown into a large organizations, but we keep trying to operate like a startup, like a big group of startups that still operate like day one when they were created.
So we talk to about 1,500 organizations a year. And if we take what we learn from them, from Amazon, from our backgrounds, from looking at these anti-patterns, we find 3 conditions need to be true for transformation to be sustainable in organizations. Number 1 is clarity, being clear on what good looks like. What are the real problems and opportunities to be solved? Secondly, every employee feeling a sense of ownership, that they have the agency to make a difference, to take ownership of some of those problems and solve them. And thirdly, that uniquely human characteristic of curiosity, of being able to take problems and having the freedom to be able to figure out what a good solution looks like. This forms a virtuous circle. What we find is clarity enables ownership, because if you're clear as an employee what great looks like and the problem you're owning, you're more likely to take ownership. If you take ownership, then you feel like you can experiment. You can apply your curiosity. Let me find out a better way of running this process or fixing this problem. And then thirdly, curiosity itself enables experimentation. Experimentation brings further clarity to what the opportunities are in the organization. So it becomes this virtuous reinforcing cycle that continues to get better over time. What we want to do briefly is for each of these 3, just give you a few examples. And what we really want to leave behind with you is the idea that transformation doesn't need to be soul destroying. It can be something that is continuous and can be applied from every seat in every organization. Because if we look at clarity, for instance, tin men organizations breed this bureaucratic fog of silos and hierarchies and spans of control, which splits up outcomes across different teams so no one has total ownership. Great organizations create clarity. They create context so employees understand the context in which they're solving a particular problem. Clarity is the oxygen that fuels progress in organizations. We know 50%-ish of transformations fail quite simply because there isn't that clarity around what the transformation means. And all of this is fueled by stories. For anyone here last year, you may remember Indra Nooyi, the former CEO of PepsiCo, talk about one of the key characteristics of good leaders is a storyteller, because it doesn't just inform us intellectually, it grabs us emotionally and makes us excited to actually solve some of these problems. And this isn't a one-time task, this is an ongoing process. Let me give you a couple of examples. In tin man organizations, strategy was an often closely guarded secret, or at best, it was just a poorly communicated approach to a business. Employees were left in the dark. They sought out their own direction. They decided what great looks like in their organization. It leads to more silos, more confusion, more wasted effort. For anyone who has read Daniel Coyle's book, The Culture Code, he actually puts numbers around this. 64% of leaders believe they have clearly communicated their strategy and purpose in an organization. 2% of employees understand what it is. How depressing is that? Coming to work all excited to do a great job, but your version of a great job is different to everyone else's. So a few simple things we see Octopus organizations do. Firstly, have a widely known, inspiring purpose. For those that worked with us for a while, you'll know Amazon's purpose, to be Earth's most customer-centric company. Ask anyone in the building, any Amazonian, I'd hope they know that, because not only is it simple, but it actually relates to the jobs we do every day. We heard from Indra last year about this, that she had for 12 years the same consistent message around performance with purpose, which was deeply embedded in the organization and drove everything they did. Secondly, communicate continually. It's the old adage, we all know this, that if you communicated something until you're bored, you need to do it again and again, taking every opportunity to reinforce it. You as a leader saying this has a big impact on the organization. And then thirdly, often we think of strategy as a way of fixing things that aren't working in the organization, which is a little depressing sometimes. Another way of looking at it is maybe take a look at what Amazon.com does. Anchors a strategy on durable needs. Those things that we believe aren't going to change for the next 10 years. As Amazon customers, you probably don't want less selection, higher prices, and slower deliveries in the future. That's a great basis to form a strategy that has longevity and positivity within the organization. Second one, just out of curiosity, who has one major priority for their organization? Did you know before the 1900s, the word priority did not have a plural? How can it? A priority is a priority. And yet we find organizations today with up to 400 priorities. Often we ask audiences, how many people are good at multitasking? And the reality is our neural architecture does not support multitasking. Every time we switch context, we lose up to 30 minutes. So this idea that an individual has multiple priorities, unfortunately leads to a lot of waste and churn in organizations. We've heard some great stories here. One of the CEOs we interviewed last year, Benedict Byrne, he runs a sports apparel company. And he was telling a story. He was driving, I believe, through Taliban country at the time. He was going to climb a mountain. He's an extreme mountaineer. And he was saying at 8,000 meters, it's a death zone. Oxygen cannot sustain life. And there's two ways to get through the death zone to summit. One is what the average extreme mountaineer does, carries 50 to 55 kilos of equipment, trudges slowly through the death zone, turns around and goes back. If anything changes, which invariably it will, like the weather, for instance, they have no agility. He takes a different approach. His team, each of his team members carries no more than 7.4 kilos of equipment, including their skis. He will shave his eyebrows, his hair, cut tags off his clothes, cut his shoelaces to get down to 7.4 kilos. He will then take 2 days to get through the death zone and then ski straight back down. And the reason he told us this story was he applies that in his workplace. As CEO, not only does he set priorities, but he makes it very clear what are those zippers we're going to cut off, the eyebrows we're going to share. What aren't we going to do as an organization?
I hope he doesn't ask his people to shave their eyebrows.
We didn't quite get into that level of detail. We also heard a story from one of the CEOs of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. She shared the story, the hell yes test. It's so easy as leaders to sit around a table and say, yeah, that priority sounds good. Yeah, that priority sounds good too. Where's the energy? Where are the leaders saying, hell yes, we really need to do this. It's going to make a difference. Where can we drive that real focus in organizations?
Now let's look at the second of the 3 accelerates we found. It's about ownership. Ownership is about the mix of giving responsibility, but also giving authorship to people. Without it, you have a workforce that waits for permission, or worst case, red squirrels, hopefully not. So ownership is a mutual thing. As leaders, you need to be comfortable to give it, to recede control into the organization, but people also need to want to take it. And we find a lot of leaders we worked with, the CEO of an investment bank, who said, my people don't want to take ownership because often there is no upside to it. We feel unsafe. We don't understand what the boundaries are, and God forbid we overstep them. It can have career limiting impact. Or what if the first decision we make is maybe not a good one and we're in trouble for it? So let me tell you the story of the pig and the chicken. They walk down the road and the chicken says to the pig, let's open a restaurant. And so the pig says, sure, what shall we serve? And the chicken says, well, ham and eggs, of course. And the pig stops in its tracks and says, you realize I have to be much more committed to that than you. What's the moral of the story? The fundamental truth about there are those who contribute and those who are accountable. Often we find so many chickens in our organizations who go from meeting to meeting, want to lay their eggs, supporting the consensus, giving opinions, want to be giving partial approvals, but we have so few pigs in our organization who want to own the delivery of promised value. Maybe don't call them pigs. We call them single-threaded leaders in our organizations. But this is about someone having ownership, injecting energy into an organization, being accountable for outcomes and corralling the organization around this. And to your point earlier, Phil, prioritization. If you can't find a single-threaded leader, then maybe the initiative isn't important enough because there shouldn't be that many single-threaded leaders. When we don't know where to continue, when we have lengthy conversations and lots of chicken debates at AWS, at some point sooner or later, someone in the meeting will ask, who's the single-threaded owner? And the debate will stop, and that person will take accountability and the decision. So what can you do to help them? Name your pigs, your single-threaded leaders, downsize their decisions if they are new owners, new to ownership, so you can reduce the blast radius of maybe the decisions that they don't quite know yet how to make and get them to make them faster. And add some form of a chicken tax. Why are people in the meeting? Do they have to be there? Can they commit resources, or are they just there to lay their eggs? Then, interestingly, many organizations have such a fear of failure that they stop taking decisions at all. And so very aptly, we had the wonderful opportunity to speak to Annie Duke. Has anyone heard of Annie Duke since we're in Las Vegas? She is the most successful female poker player of all times. She's made $4 million in prize money. She also has a PhD in decision sciences and worked with Nobel Prize winning economics professors who've also looked at decision sciences. And she tells us that we should treat decisions like bets on the future. Making uncertainty explicit by saying, I'm 70% sure about a decision, means we can examine our beliefs, our decision biases, and say, might this belief be not true? What other evidence exists there? And then, of course, playing poker is a game of odds. And you have to know dispassionately when to abandon your hand. So humans, however, are very, very difficult at quitting decisions because we fall for something called loss aversion. We want to prove that we're right. So Annie suggested to us, set quit criteria. When you start your big new initiative that you spend so much energy, business cases and approvals, getting it past all those chickens. But as you do that, set quit criteria from the start to avoid hanging on to initiatives that should maybe no longer function because they don't give value in your organization. And lastly, we fall for something called resulting. When we made a good decision, it had a good outcome. But when the outcome was bad, we obviously made a bad decision. We just talked about that organizations are complex. So a lot of things can go wrong, even though we made a great decision. Document your decisions and treat them like you would investments. That's called fielding, the disciplined process of analyzing how much of a decision's outcome was due to skill and how much due to luck. And when you document it, you can also let new people in your organization see your process so they learn how you want these new owners to make better decisions. None of this ownership will work, however, unless we can get people in a safe space to feel comfortable. You will all have heard the term psychological safety. We had the awesome opportunity to interview Amy Edmondson. She's, how do we describe her?
Mother of psychological safety.
Yeah, Harvard professor, written lots of books on this topic. And she told us there are lots of misconceptions. You as leaders can't command psychological safety. It's something that people feel in the moment. It's also not a softy thing that means we are just nice to each other and don't have difficult conversations. Not at all. But you can help build it team by team constantly and nurture it. So doing things like asking, what am I missing? It creates an environment where people can say, oh, have you thought about? So you invite different opinions. And even if someone doesn't have good intentions, Amy tells us, you're better off assuming they too are trying to create a better world. Because that way, you're at least going to approach them with genuine learning orientation, doing your part in creating psychological safety. Lastly, the other advice we want to share, eliminate brilliant jerks. No, we don't mean physically, but actually nothing weakens the willingness to speak up more than a person who poisons the environment with arrogance, with disrespect, with intimidation, or other undesirable reactions. For colleagues to be comfortable, to be vulnerable. No person maybe. There's a point where maybe they might create value, but that value is never as high as the damage they cause. And we have a lot of studies to actually prove that. So now, let's look at some examples around how to drive up curiosity. That's all about understanding your customer, using data, using anecdotes, being close to customers, questions, experimenting, and learning. Let's start with this. Does anyone here know where square trees grow? I mean, I at least expected the answer Minecraft. Actually, they do grow in Panama for real, which I didn't know until I looked at this. What's the point of the story? Notice what happens when you hear the question. There's a knowledge gap that you feel a desire to close, a tension between what you know and what you want to know. And yet the learning the answer provides no objective extrinsic reward. That's curiosity, gaining pleasure through the voluntary pursuit of information and knowledge. You want to create a lot of that feeling in our organizations. Yet it gets trained out of us. Can you guess how many questions a child asks on average per hour? Those who have parents, have children will know. Why? About 100 and up to 107 questions an hour. By the time we're in school and then adults, this goes down to just 3 questions an hour if you're lucky. Curiosity gets trained out of this. We need to have answers at school, and you as leaders are probably expected every day to have answers too. So how can we bring it back? The main enemy to curiosity in organizations is the fear of failure. Failing feels like an impediment to efficiency in the Tin Man world of thinking. Our whole lives we think failure is bad. Prospect theory tells us that losing feels twice as bad as winning feels good. And even our language says we are wrong. It's personally painful and shameful to us. It touches our personal beliefs and value when we are wrong. Octopus organizations, on the other hand, fail in the future to learn in the present. They use pre-mortems. What's the pre-mortem? When you go live with an initiative in a few months before, you sit your team down and you say, imagine we have failed so spectacularly that we can't look ourselves in the eye when we walk past the corridor in the office. It physically makes us sick. Now you've got 2 minutes to write down what went wrong. People are really excited to oblige and share what could go wrong. Whereas if you ask them what their project status is, they will say green, green, green until it goes live and it's red. So use this opportunity to learn what could go wrong. Use pre-mortems. Start with a hypothesis. Turn things around. Change the language from one of execution to one of discovery. We can remove our idea of I am wrong to I am doing a hypothesis testing, an experiment. It might be right or it could come out wrong. And lastly, of course, true failure is not learning. Now, our last point. How do you get a monkey on a pedestal to talk? I haven't lost my mind. This is actually a question and a metaphor that Astro Teller uses. He's the CEO of Alphabet X's Moonshot Lab, so responsible for self-driving cars and other incredible innovations. And he says that most organizations, when they start a new project, they start with a pedestal. In other words, they want to make progress. It feels good to have immediate gratification to get going. It's great to show your bosses that you're making progress. It means you can stay in your comfort zone just to get started. Actually, if you can't get the monkey to talk, in other words, if you can't tackle the most difficult problem, it makes absolutely no sense wasting time, resource, and energy on the pedestal. So his point is solve the hard problems first and do things as a leader to say, let's change our demo culture. For the first several check-ins, I don't want to see a polished slide deck. I really want to see the deep, messy, most incomplete progress on the single hardest part of work you're doing. Cultivate intellectual honesty. Celebrate those people who passionately put a project forward and then absolutely dispassionately say, it's not going to work. I can't get the monkey to talk. Give them hugs because they free up people, resources, funding to go on to more important and critical tasks in your organization. So those were a few examples. Let's bring it all together.
So in a world of agentic AI, generative AI, we've got the technology to solve pretty much any problem or take advantage of any opportunity you can imagine. What we advocate for, though, is how do we think about our organizations differently? That's going to be the differentiator about whether we use that technology effectively or not. How do we bring clarity? How do we give people agency, ownership in organizations? And how do we unleash a curiosity to think differently about the problems and opportunities ahead of us? If we do this, we create more responsive, more sustainable, more kind organizations, which are more profitable. We also enable organizations that understand how work really gets done. Most organizations don't understand that flow of work. How does work really get done? And how do we make it easier to get a product, a service into the hands of customers? And then how do you find a balance too? Jana, you talked about two pizza teams, for instance. We know that value is normally delivered, particularly when it comes to innovation, through teams, not individuals. How do you find that right balance between measuring and rewarding the individual and measuring and rewarding the team that is driving a business outcome? And what we advocate is quite simple. One of the chief transformations officers we talked to in a mining company, not renowned for innovation, advocated for lighting 1,000 fires. If you can get 1,000 people excited in your organization who really feel like they can make a difference, that's where the magic happens. That's where you start a transformation that a single leader leaving cannot put out. And start simple. Start very simple. You pick something, an anti-pattern. And often what we find there is, if you share the anti-patterns with your team, watch for body language, the rolling eyes when you say, hey, are our decisions fast enough? Do you feel like you've got ownership? Watch for those slumped shoulders, the laughs, the indicators that this really resonates. Come up with a hypothesis to test or to break that anti-pattern. Test it. If the hypothesis fails, you've got some learnings. Spread those learnings for the next series of tests you want to run. Best case is that hypothesis is true, and you find opportunities to actually improve every day, every week, your organization. And then let people take those learnings and apply them to their own job, to every seat they sit in the organization. Build on those learnings, amplify what's good in the organizations, recognize people not just for successfully changing the organization, but also those people who are brave enough to try something which results in learnings. So with that, thank you so much for your time.